Likewise, the instantaneous nature of social media's disbursement of affect is frequently cited in order to undermine its epistemic validity, which is its validity as a knowledge source, and the rhetoric to do so is often feminized. Whether good or bad, the ubiquity of social media platforms and our use of them in the contemporary moment is undeniable. In part facilitated by the proliferation of smart mobile devices, social media users have begun leaving larger networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter in favor of app-based media whose user bases are much smaller and more intimate. Perhaps most interesting and characteristics of these is the app called Snapchat. Using Snapchat as a case study, I seek to explore how the ephemeral content of the app changes its usage in contrast to platforms like Facebook and Twitter. To do so, I appeal to the work of Wendy Chun and Lauren Berlant, using Chun's analysis of temporality in new media and Berlant's conception of the intimate public. This essay, which is a longer essay, seeks to sift out the relationship between intimacy, publicity, and the public sphere, and temporality in relation to this media. Additionally, this piece seeks to explore the deep connection between the intimacy of Snapchat's public and its supposed ephemeral temporality. This investigation culminates with a gesture towards larger and deeper questions concerning the liberatory political potential of the ephemeral media to instigate structural transformation out of shifts of collective feeling, what I call ephemeral bursts of affect, that are increasingly being mediated via social media platforms like Snapchat. And so this paper is broken into three parts, and the first part of the essay is a kind of case study that takes Snapchat as sort of the typical form of this ephemeral media in order to demonstrate what makes ephemeral social media so different from these other larger platforms. So the text on the slide comes from the keynote address delivered by Evan Spiegel, CEO of Snapchat, at the AXS Partner Summit on January 25th, 2014. Snapchat, a mobile app launched in September 2011, has seen an explosion in its user base in the 3 years since its development. Or just maybe a little bit more now because I wrote this about a year ago. As touted by the app CEO, Snapchat's novelty stems largely from the ephemerality of its messages. Spiegel proudly asserts that ephemerality is the core of all conversations, those taking place through the app, as well as conversations that occur in person. The point of a conversation for Spiegel is not to archive it, but rather to communicate the experiences of the present. Designed specifically for use amongst much smaller publics than the more than 300 friends of the average Facebook user, Snapchat is, as Spiegel states, for use among friends and not strangers. Fostering a feeling of intimacy, conversations occurring on Snapchat are meant to allow, quote, room for growth, emotional risk, expression, mistakes. In short, it affords us the space to feel a sense of vulnerability not available on larger social networking sites in order to create an environment conducive to more personal and intimate communication. The allure of a snap lies precisely in its disposability. Because the content of a snap disappears shortly after it's been received, the focus is shifted from generating affirmation around the media object to communication that can take place through the snap itself. Its ephemeral temporality and eschewal of the archival emphasis that is often associated with things like the internet by a lot of media theorists enables an intimacy among user networks that is unlike other social media platforms. And so the next section of the paper explores Wendy Chun's critique of the enduring ephemeral that she sees as the result of digital media's emphasis on memory and archivability. My argument seeks to complicate Chun's view by juxtaposing her conception of the temporality of digital media to Snapchat and its explicit eschewal of the archive in favor of the ephemeral. In her essay, The Enduring Ephemeral, or The Future is a Memory, Wendy Chun argues that the characterization of digital media as memory is what has enabled utopian speculations about digital media's capacity to solve enduring problems for a better future. Digital media is often portrayed by utopian theorists, and she cites Howard Rheingold as one of the sort of poster children of this, so these utopian theorists as the solution to archival problems of decay and impermanence. The promise of the computer and digital media is the promise to be able to overcome threats to the permanence of the archive. It is for this reason that she argues that the permanence of digital media's archive is purely mythical. It would seem then that Snapchat, in its embrace of the ephemeral, has a unique potential to break the repetitive cycle that characterizes the enduring ephemeral content of digital media for Chun. The content of a snap is not easily recreated or captured without breaking the implicit norms created among users. Unlike text messages or posts to Facebook, the content of a snap cannot be recirculated and represented as new ad infinitum. A snap is also open-ended and contains the fluidity of a certain undecidability, reaching towards both the past and the future. As this quote from Nathan Jurgensen shows, through a snap we are given a glimpse, told a secret, that requires our attention to decipher its meaning before its clock has run out and the image is no longer available for our perusal. We must work to fill in its context, which is often not given to us, and we are given the opportunity to continue the conversation into the future. This required labor of filling in and apprehending a snap fosters a certain sense of intimacy amongst its users. And that brings us to the next part of the paper, which employs Lauren Berlant's conception of the intimate public. So rather than focusing on shared narratives taking the form of photos, links to news sources, and public forums, Snapchat's content is accessible to few users in much smaller networks and does not seem to carry the weightiness of political discourse of larger platforms. Selfies, uncontextualized video shorts, and text conversations that disappear are the more usual subjects of a snap. As a relatively new user to Snapchat, I can personally attest to the banality and everydayness of the subject matter of my snaps, often selfies taken in my office during writing breaks. Snapchat snaps operate as an apolitical collection of what I call ephemeral bursts of affect. I use Snapchat to communicate my excitement, curiosity, or boredom to a small public of those I know more intimately than the myriad of Facebook friends, and this has an effect on the content I'm willing to share. The ephemerality of a snap, like a secret, generates a sense of intimacy amongst its addressees, and it is in this light that I would like to connect the media of Snapchat to Lauren Berlant's conception of the intimate public. And so just to sort of tell you what it is what she's doing with this idea of, and the concept of the intimate public, she describes the intimate public as having the following characteristics. First, it's a shared fantasy, or it has a shared central fantasy that allows members to transcend their particular position to join the generalizable community. Second, there's a circularity of structures that stems from the commodity culture from which it emerges, which allows participants to share a certain worldview and feel a sense of belonging. There's also a, quote, porous affective sense of identification that an intimate public affords to its members. And then again, the promise of belonging that it gives to these members who are often women or other historically marginalized or unrecognized groups on her account. So intimate publics survive and thrive off of a shared central fantasy. They reflect and absorb many modes of life and project back to their members some fantasy of being able to transcend one's particular position to join the generalizable community. And the intimate public is a safe haven from the politics of the public sphere. So she's sort of offering this conception in juxtaposition to those theorists that talk about the public sphere, like Jürgen Habermas or Nancy Fraser. It's this flexibility and vernacular predisposition of the intimate public that allows us the room to stretch Berlant's initial conception and to work out what it would mean to apply the concept of the intimate public to an analysis of Snapchat. In our world of oversharing, we are constantly reminded about digital threats to our privacy. Snapchat offers its users the fantasy that with its disappearing content, these looming threats can be escaped. The appeal of Snapchat, like the appeal of the intimate public, comes from the promise it offers its users of a refuge from the antagonistic goings-on of platforms like Facebook and Twitter. This intimacy, and to a certain degree anonymity that Snapchat offers to its users, is what draws people to it. And it's for this reason that Berlant asserts that, quote, the intimate public's relation to the political and to politics is extremely uneven and complex. In the last 2 decades, social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have gained a reputation for their revolutionary potential, largely stemming from their prominent role in recent social movements, and we can think of many. Studies by Pew Research have also confirmed the political activity of users of Facebook and Twitter. Unlike its predecessors, Snapchat's ephemeral content and a skew of a largely accessible archive seems to undermine its political potential. Given how closely Snapchat maps on to Berlant's conception of the intimate public, it seems difficult to imagine the ways in which Snapchat's ephemeral bursts of affect can be collected and harnessed for political change, at least political change as it's currently conceived. And so just as a sort of summary of what I've shared with you all, the work of Wendy Chun reminds us of how difficult it is to theorize new media and its newness, the speed at which it operates. Snapchat was launched in 2011 and has only recently seen a boom in its popularity. The newness of Snapchat makes tracking down its demographics quite difficult and consequently makes it difficult to theorize. Despite this difficulty, by placing the app in conversation with current theory on existing forms of new media, as well as with cultural theorists, this paper seeks to demonstrate that Snapchat's uniqueness stems from its appeal to ephemerality. Furthermore, Snapchat's explicit refusal to engage in the archival promise of social media giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram complicate the theories of those like Wendy Chun who study the temporality of digital media. Chun's critique of digital media centers on what she argues is the mythological status of the permanence of new media's archive. Because Snapchat has opted instead for disposability and ephemerality, her theory does not seem able to accommodate the new development of ephemeral social media. The ephemeral temporality of a snap generates a certain kind of intimacy that is akin to a secret. It allows us to retain our memory of the conversation without being required to store it. By securing the fantasy that our message, photo, or video will disappear shortly after it is sent, Snapchat allows a certain vulnerability and spontaneity in its content that is not available to users of more traditional and permanent platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Berlant's conception of the intimate public closely connects to the ways in which Snapchat has manifested itself in our contemporary culture. The intimate public allows us to make sense of the way in which Snapchat favors affective and everyday content over the, quote, political, as well as the fantasy and a sense of belonging that it offers to its publics. And so, And so we're left with the question of Snapchat's relationship to the political. Can we harness ephemerality and the affective nature of a snap for substantive and structural political change? Like the intimate public, there's a certain appeal in the haven offered by ephemeral social media from the antagonisms and pressure to document and archive of more traditional forms and platforms. Like the intimate public, it seems difficult to envision the ways in which the ephemerality and affective nature of a snap could be harnessed for political change as we currently envision it, particularly in connection with the goings-on of the public sphere. It seems as though in order to harness the power of affect, as it is being increasingly mediated through ephemeral social media platforms like Snapchat, we would first need to revisit our definition of the political and what constitutes substantive political change, as well as its association with the public sphere that seems to purposively exclude publics and media that are associated with affect and sentimentality. And that's all I have. And I guess we're doing questions later, so I have an image.
Something about being nervous makes it feel like you're using a thumb drive for the first time. The formatting on this might be a little weird because my fonts didn't embed it. And, I thought to myself, if any group was ever going to appreciate Gotham book, it was this group. And, I guess it did transfer. So, I guess we'll see how this looks. Let me start my timer here.
Do you want to get a solution?
Oh, yeah. Cool. Okay, well, all of these talks really beautifully set us up to talk about girls and feeling and the things we're going to talk about at the end here. So the time girls spend in college, typically from ages 18 to 22, is a significant period of personal growth. And this process is fraught and complicated, as many of you can remember. Girls are faced with their own experiences, social pressure, and messages from society writ large about who they are and how they should be. Yet self-expression during this time is often dismissed as sentimental or overly emotional, attention-seeking, or irrational. This is further complicated when girls turn to the internet, where the things that they say can be widely viewed and nearly permanent. Girls are faced with conflicting desires for participation and for privacy from certain viewers, and it is at this intersection that we find Tumblr, a microblogging platform that's known for being an emotional and youthful online space. My talk today examines how the qualities of Tumblr and the Tumblr platform facilitate the kind of intimate personal expression that we have talked about today, and also contribute to creating a space for feminist theorizing. In doing so, I wish to complicate an implicit boundary that fails to value or at times even recognize political conversations that occur outside of discretely political spaces. Tumblr's limited, often like-minded audience and the lowered stakes of anonymity are each key features that encourage both personal and political expression online. For focus group participants, the policy of a back-and-forth Facebook debate with relatives or former classmates kept them quiet on other social networking sites. They described these interactions as exhausting, not as true conversations, but as times when they needed to give long, explanatory defenses as to why their concerns about patriarchy or systemic racism or sexuality were issues at all. While debate is almost universally accepted as a positive, constructive element of political discourse, this research calls into question the ways in which these ideals silence girls online and ask us to rethink what it means to say that the personal is political. My talk today is based on a much larger research project that's empirically based on a series of focus groups with college-age women and their use of the microblogging platform Tumblr. In the spring of 2014, I held a series of focus groups with girls in the 5-college consortium in Western Massachusetts. Throughout the talk, I referred to these participants as these girls. And even though girls can sound diminutive, I use this word in a connection with a legacy of scholarship on things like the Riot Grrrl movement and other playful and chaotic mediated spaces that provide a space for the messy careening between these polarities of participation and also political and personal diatribes, a process through which feminist theorizing and local knowledge production takes place. In the course of my research, I spoke to 19 women, and my interpretive findings are based on about 55 pages of transcript generated through these focus groups. And then I use the word these because these are not the findings of all Tumblr users or even all female Tumblr users, but instead a very small selection of girls and how they make space for their voices online. So Tumblr is a space for girls to express what one participant called the great in-between of their lives. While on Facebook they felt like they could only share positive things like life events, graduation, going on cool trips, excitement, happiness, if they wanted to express sadness or anger or talk about an ex-boyfriend or a misogynistic coworker, they turned to Tumblr. This was especially true for anger. The word rant and rage post showed up again and again in our transcripts and in our discussions. And it became clear that this was due to 3 central affordances of the Tumblr platform: anonymity, audience, and interaction. And we're going to move pretty quickly through most of these and focus mostly on the audience. So when I asked in an early focus group, who do you think reads your Tumblr? One of the participants responded, ideally my close friends and strangers. This was met by laughs and nods of encouragement from the other participants. And while this seems like it could include anybody that could read a Tumblr, there are actually people that are decidedly missing from this statement, which is parents and acquaintances. Part of the attraction to Tumblr as a platform is that it's perceived as an audience that's less wide-reaching than other social networking sites. Oh, I think I have some cool effects in here. Yeah. So this is an idea called context collapse, but we're avoiding jargon today. So rather than being based on their offline identity in social circles, Tumblr networks are actually built through interest. When asked about what made them follow another Tumblr user, participants reiterated to me again and again that it was based on the content that they posted, not some offline relationship. Oftentimes, not to enforce digital dualism here, oftentimes they were friends with people that they followed, but this was an incidental aspect of their relationship online. So the nature of networks on Tumblr means that when it comes to expressing their feelings, users imagine their audience to be made up of other young people who come to the space with a sense of understanding regarding the typical structures of young girls. Tumblr has a reputation for being an emotional space, as Brittany beautifully set up for us. And disclosure, especially really personal disclosure, is normalized here. It seems to be mutually understood across the platform that the things you post are as much for you yourself as they are for anyone else, and this is according to my participants. The girls view these statements and the statement of others as a kind of catharsis rather than something to get a reaction or to start drama. This is due in large part to the way the interaction takes place on Tumblr. Posts on Tumblr, if you guys aren't familiar, just can't generate the same kind of attention show that a post on Facebook does. The comment that you make on a Tumblr post can only happen through reblogging something to your own page. And so the kind of things that we're really familiar with when someone posts on Facebook about being sad or angry, like, are you all right? Oh my God, are you okay? That could only really happen on Tumblr if you reblog that content to your own page. So when they posted to Tumblr, when these reactions didn't happen, they felt that they could just put things out there. In comparison to other social networking sites, Tumblr is unusual in this sense, in its lack of commenting. Because commentary can really only take place on your own page, the content has to meet the reblogging user's curatorial standards. Oh, and I have a quote here from one of my participants. Whatever they wish to comment on will be reposted alongside the rest of the images and words that they've collected. Participants describe predominantly reposting content that was reflective of their own feelings. And so this means that when something was reblogged, it was perceived more as I understand or I feel or have felt this way too, rather than something that is simply validating that person. Tumblr's platform design means that users view content that's curated through the follow feature. So what does this really mean for the political? This, combined with the norms of Tumblr following, in which users connect through shared interests with a decreased pressure to follow people they know offline, means that social networks built on Tumblr are often like-minded or at the very least receptive to the kind of content one would produce or share. Participants describe Tumblr as a safe space to express themselves. Alternately, participants generally viewed Facebook as an internet space they felt required them to have debates with other users. Because networks on Facebook are built with people in their offline social circles, it makes sense to think that there would be more disagreement. And because there's an assumption for a response on Facebook, it makes sense that these disagreements would turn into arguments. But this wasn't the case on Tumblr. Participants were careful to point out that it wasn't total agreement. They talked a lot about critical things and the critical and social justice-y and radical type topics. And we are all familiar in this room of the kind of negotiations for identity and terms that happen in these kinds of discussions. But they felt that these things were being set into a receptive environment of negotiation rather than the kind of flip writing off that doesn't acknowledge that there are issues at all. I can't overstate as a researcher how important this difference was. So research in the last year by the Pew Internet and American Life Project reported on what they've termed social media's spiral of silence. The phrase spiral of silence is borrowed from the work of Noel Newman, who observed that people don't speak up when they feel that their opinions aren't shared. The findings by the group at Pew support a chorus of voices from the focus group-based project, asking us to think the almost universally accepted ideal of rethink the almost universally accepted ideal of political debate. For young women especially, disagreement limited the messy, out-loud thinking that is so important to the creation of perspectives and commitments. The common concern of groupthink is indeed a very real possibility for people who are only surrounded by those who share their opinions. Yet safe and communal spaces are essential for the building of those opinions, particularly when these opinions aren't reflected in mainstream discourse. This may be especially true for young women who generally feel less capable of speaking with authority and whose informed opinions are commonly met with correction. Furthermore, the spiral of silence underscores the importance of the audience to expression online. The broader implication of the spiral of silence is that not only people don't share their opinions, but that this is amplified as people fail to realize that their opinion isn't so unusual after all. The communication that occurs on Tumblr gives college-age women a space to see that yes, in fact, others share their perspectives, interests, and frustrations. In this sense, Tumblr demonstrates how platform characteristics that encourage users to share personal self-expression are also valuable for creating other types of open forums. Though Pew terms this phenomenon social media spiral of silence, I'd like to leverage this research to challenge the idea that this is a necessary or even inevitable characteristic of all social media. Working on this project has shown me that there are significant differences in the way girls use and leverage these platforms, and this is conscious and deliberate. With careful attention to the affordances of specific internet platforms, it becomes clear that platforms such as Tumblr can challenge or even contradict the way that we theorize social media more broadly. For participants in my focus group, the expression of personal feelings and thoughts about feminist issues were almost inseparable. In one breath, the girls talked about heartbreak and misogynistic coworkers, and in the next, they talked about TV shows, Supernatural, and other things that we see so often on Tumblr. Can we extend this thought to another level and think about the way that this might affect the way that we talk in our reflect the way that we talk in our everyday lives? Can we think about the way that Tumblr allows their expressions to be obscured from the person that they're criticizing when they want to talk nastily about someone that they're Facebook friends? And extend this to the political sphere, to Tumblr providing a space for societal criticism shielded from those who may feel defensive or attacked as the norm is questioned. A similar parallel can be found in the nature of social interaction on Tumblr. Because commentary can really only take place through reblogging, people are far more likely to interact with content that reflects their own interests and opinions. This means that networks are built between users who post content that they find relevant and interesting and may want to post to their own page. When a post is reblogged, the response is interpreted as empathetic and understanding, a sharing rather than sympathy or judgment. Imagine a stream of content that reflects things that are similar to you, and a response system that signifies me too. These networks are often rightfully criticized as echo chambers or spaces of groupthink, but perhaps there are some voices that need to be echoed for us to find our own, especially if these voices are marginalized. Judith Butler argues that recognition is the wellspring of the feminist impulse. Moments when one realizes that my pain or my silence or my anger or my perception is finally not mine alone. In realizing that something you feel is shared, cultural experience is united in certain unanticipated ways. I'd like to suggest that we need to think harder and more openly about where feminist theorizing takes place. We need to look beyond the discretely political sphere to the affordances of social media that allow girls to share their thoughts of all kinds, both personal and political. And I think we will find that they are not that different.
Thank you, everyone.
You make these signs and then just point them at the panel. So you'll take IRL questions here, and I'll take one.
I actually have a question for the group to begin, and then if we want to, we have a little bit of time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. But one thing I was thinking, of course, this is a talk about feelings and emotions and all that, but the commonality, the common thread I kept thinking was that how immersed you have to be to understand what's going on, and how immersed you have to be to understand the context of this meeting, the context of this Tumblr community, what is harassment, especially in the case like Tumblr in Action, how often they're posing as allies or doing this kind of funny business where, maybe if you want to speak about that in context.
So one of the really wonderful things about writing this dissertation on Reddit, specifically my dissertation is on the Red Pill, which is a male-dominated community that teaches sexual strategy. It's a very nice way of describing it, and I will go into unless you want to talk to me after. So one of the wonderful things about writing and researching online communities is that you get to spend all day, every day on social media websites and call it research, and it's so much fun, let me tell you. I read just a ton of Tumblr in Action, and at first glance that probably doesn't sound very much like rigorous research, but it's about taking screenshots and checking it at least daily, checking it several times a day to see how conversations are moving and growing and what is popular and what is not. I've done similar things with Tumblr, I've done previous research pornography, in my opinion. You embed yourself in a community, maybe you don't even participate in it, but it's this sort of long, steep, and it's thick description that kind of gears it. So, that, does anybody else?
So
I was totally agree with everything you just said. I spend a lot of time on Reddit, a lot of my research, and I'm surprised on a regular basis by the communities that I find there and the language they develop for themselves. I don't understand what they're talking about in the first instance. It takes me quite a lot of time to unpick the nuances, and I'm probably going to be missing out on some of the deeper things just having not experienced it in person, so to speak. So yeah, context really is the kernel of my research, and it's something that I'm always working to understand and perspectivize correctly.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of these statements, and especially for me, and for coming back to the value of embedding yourself in a situation, observing the situation, and also for the research that I did talking to my participants was so valuable. It's really easy, I think, to look at a text and to think to yourself, is this capital F feminist? And there's very contradictory images that are right alongside quotes from Judith Butler or from Audre Lorde. Both of the quotes we used today actually came from Time on Tumblr, and you can think to yourself, well, yeah, how valuable really is this if you're still posting pictures of a fashion model's hand or your behind next to it? But I have to think that at the level of discourse, the participant is always right. Nevertheless, people say what they say, and so spending time embedded in the community really helped me think about what it means that people are calling this feminist theorizing. And this is what the girls wanted to talk about when I called these focus groups. So spending time there really helped me read these texts reparatively and generously, and I learned more than I would have ever done otherwise. Yeah.
Great. And then, yeah, I talked about intimate publics in my paper, so I was really struck by this sort of the way that the shared public or the shared context really generates a real sense of intimacy amongst user groups, and be it memes that are specific to various kinds of emotional responses, or threads on Tumblr and that kind of thing. So I think that's a large part of the reason I was really struck by the way that intimacy really gets created in these areas.
Great. And we have time for a couple of audience questions, maybe one or two. I see we have a question in the back.
Two.
Okay, depending on
This question is for Emma. I think I sort of just asked this question on Twitter, but I'm curious about in terms of Snapchat, in terms of the labor that goes into doing a snap, because it's not something that is going to quote unquote stay on the internet or stay as a content that you can see. Do you think people that create snaps they put less labor into those snaps? And in that way, does that create a certain intimacy as though oh, well, I don't have to put this much labor into this. People aren't really going to do this. This is kind of maybe a more real piece of content.
That's a great question. It's something I talk a little bit about, so maybe sort of that kind of question in the longer version of the paper, talking about the sort of uncurated feel of a snap. It's not like a Facebook page or even a Tumblr page where I spend a lot of time sort of curating this page and sort of thinking about how other people are going to perceive it. When I send a snap, though, obviously there are examples of snaps where people do put a lot of time. We've all seen the sort of drawings that people can render in amazing ways when they send a snap, but it's sort of it's sort of like what are they called, where you the sand drawing, a mandala, where you sort of put all this effort in and you know that it's just going to disappear. And so it does sort of allow for this sort of which I think also contributes to the intimacy that a snap
Yeah, really.
Just really put it.
I don't know if this is a whole other realm or topic, but in terms of like all video platforms, would be like YouTube or Vine, or maybe Snapchat video, have any of you noticed any sort of differences or unique aspects about those types of platforms and emotional sharing, or what other types of related concepts, like where it's sort of like any standouts or similarities or differences?
Just in terms of memes, it's quite common for videos to remain as viral medium, just because it's more difficult to alter and amend a video piece. You have to have the correct software, you have to put the time into it, whereas you can do something quite easily on Meme Generator or in Photoshop, doing something with InDesign, it's a bit of a, it's a bit of investment. So although there are things like the downfall meme, which happens to be quite successful, they're not as prevalent, so video forms tend to stay viral.
I have one question for the group. Come from this.
Well, I think this gentleman has a question.
Okay, great.
I'm going to dispense with this. This question is in some ways sort of related. It seems to me that the difference in the sort of receptivity of the various communities in some ways is based on what medium they're based on. Reddit, strikes me as like primarily text-based, where Tumblr seems to me to be like photographic, and then we're talking about Snapchat as being video, and that each one of those creates a sort of different standard for argumentativeness or receptivity or emotional affect. I'm wondering if there's, if you guys have any thoughts on that.
So that's a really interesting point, and I don't know of much writing that's been done on that, how different mediums create or at least encourage different kinds of kind of affective interaction. And if anybody does know that, please tweet me because I would love to read it. Have yours books. One of the concepts that I'm working on with Reddit is the idea of a textual community and how the circulation of text and these economies create different types of affinities. And I can't really tell you anything about it yet because the research is just in the very early stages. But I think that it's a very fruitful kind of avenue for investigation, particularly once you're talking about the differences between. Just to back up, I think one of the things that needs to be done first is look at how, for example, a community that shares videos operates, and then how a community that mostly shares photos operates. And then once all of that work is done, I think some really interesting comparisons could come about. So.
Sandy, you could add any questions? If you have any.
Well, I think that's a super interesting question, and just coming back to the perspective on media in general, I'd like to challenge us to think about not just the medium itself, but the affordances of the medium. So what is video making possible, perhaps, that text isn't making possible? Is this really new? Constantly asking yourself that. Is there is this the possibility, is the possibility not built into the platform, but something that users accomplish on their own? Thinking about these kinds of questions, and I definitely think, just to mirror what Brittany says, that I would venture to certainly guess that yes, that these afford different kinds of expression and different kinds of affective responses. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists and for the great questions. Thanks.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. It's so exciting.
When I found out I was really using Keynote, I was like, I can't use Keynote.
I was feeling
all cities and all different places. Well, no, that's not true. I was thinking of Providence, but that was actually when you did your reading.
Oh yeah, I was here. I was in Providence like years ago.
Right.
That was it.
I'm usually already in the world is concentrated on most.
I'm nervous about being the cancer. I know, right?
But I'm excited. I'm Paul. Hey. How are you? Nice to see you. Finally, we're like here together. I know. It's nice. I'm gonna put mine on. Should I?
I guess, yeah, everyone's loading your...
Loading. Did you load? Hi.
I'm guessing we're all putting our slides on here, right?
Do you all need any help getting all the slides on the desktop?
I might need some Mac food.
Okay.
I'm a Linux user. I've just put in my USB stick. Where do I find it?
Okay, go down to the bottom. I think a little thing is going to pop up.
Right.
And then go to type Finder, I believe. I'm not a Mac user. Finder, full click. Yeah. Then you see it in this area here. Maybe you can get back. You get to give it a full.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
There we go. Fabulous. Thank you.
You just drag it onto the desktop.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
You good?
Yeah.
Good.
Well done.
Thank you.
Is your name tag upside down on purpose?
Possibly.
It can totally be a statement. That's fine.
How are you
doing
doing?
alright?
Yeah. How are you doing? You okay? You had disappeared, so I was worried and running around after you. I love the reaction. It's about ethics in games. Well done. What was that for?
That was my undergrad lecture.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.